Hello, New Orleans. How is everyone doing? Good? Excited after the keynote? Yeah, some cool stuff coming up. Yeah, hands up in the room, any of you guys who this is your first conference, Tableau conference. Yeah, a lot of newbies in the room. This is my first US conference as well for Tableau. I've been at Tableau 2 years, but I have presented at the European conference. And just to put things into perspective, this room is the whole of the European conference that we hosted just a few months ago. So 17,000 people is a lot for me. So welcome to Monkeying About with Survey Data in Tableau Prep. As Rory mentioned in the introduction, my name is Archana Ganeshlingam, and I'm a senior product consultant based across the pond in our London office. I'm going to start by thanking those of you who have been filling in that survey as you're coming in. For those of you still working on it, you've got some time now while we get started with the introductions. So just one more reminder, head to tinyurl.com/tabmonkey to take part in this session. Cool. So I've been at Tableau for just over 2 years, and in this time, I found a niche of customers working with survey data. There's a huge amount of data here, but no easy way to visualize it. From speaking with customers, it was clear that no one's actually sure how to structure their data to make that analysis easy. What I wanted to do was put together resources that would help you guys do this. I started with one blog post explaining how to reshape survey data using Tableau Desktop. But then a month later, in April, we released Tableau Prep, which makes working with survey data so much easier. This session is going to be covering the concepts covered in both those two blog posts. But before we get to the learning objectives, I want to start with a quick story. How many of you guys in the audience are single? Anyone? Any singletons in the room? How many of you guys have a bad date story? Yeah? I think everyone does, regardless of whether you're single or not. But I think I've got one story to top them all. So we meet up for a slice of pizza, and it's a pretty awkward date. No need to get into the details of why. But I get home, and a full 45 minutes later, I get a text message with the following. Hi, please could you fill in this anonymous survey? So as any curious person is wont to do, I click on the link, and I'm taken to this. That's right. What you're looking at is a dating approval survey. A real survey that a real person sent to me after a real date. Now, I might not be lucky in love, but if there's one thing I can do well, it's helping people see and understand their data. So I did the only good thing a good product consultant would do, and I sent him links to my blog posts. After all, I got to keep that view count up. So now on to the aims for this session. I want you all to leave being able to identify the main types of questions used in surveys, then to understand why survey data needs to be reshaped in order to be able to do analysis, and of course, how to do all of this using Tableau Prep and Tableau Desktop. So let's get into it. As you were coming in, some of you guys had the time to complete that quick survey. We're going to be analyzing the results of that live in just a bit. But before we do that, let's take a look at the types of questions that I asked. First were the demographic attributes. These are the questions that you want to group your respondents by. Things like gender, age, role, income, and ethnicity. In my survey, one example of that would be the what role are you question. Next, we have the single select questions, where you can only choose one from a list of options. That's the question that asks you what you are most excited to do here. Multiple select questions are the check all that apply questions that let you choose as many as you want from a list. That'd be the what products do you use question that was included in my survey. And finally, we've got like-at-scale questions that ask you to rate something on a scale. This can be numeric, like my shoddy Uber rating up there, or text-based, like agreement or satisfaction. You should be easily able to convert these question types from one to another. If you flew in for conference, I asked you some questions about your flight. For everyone else, I've asked you about your hotels. Both these were on text-based scales, but we're going to be converting those into numbers later. So now let's take a look at the data. Most tools will output it something like this, a row per respondent. It's easy for us to understand since we can read across and know exactly the profile of the person. Take, for instance, Sasha. I know she's a customer, she uses Desktop and Tableau online, and she's here to party. She didn't fly in, but she's happy with how clean her hotel is. It's easy. But for Tableau, this means we have a huge number of dimensions and measures to sift through. Remember that dimensions are the categorical variables. So in this case, the survey questions, while measures are the quantitative variables we will want to perform the maths on, so things like sums, averages, and medians. As with any data set, Tableau works best when we're working with few columns and more rows. Think tall and thin rather than short and wide. A good way to structure this data would be to take those 2 rows and 9 columns and transpose those into 4 columns and many more rows. Now we have a row per respondent per question. In Tableau, we call this pivoting the data. Remember that we'll have to use count distinct of response ID rather than total number of records to get the correct counts. What does this look like in Desktop? Well, it means we have a data structure that's much easier to work with in Tableau, since we have fewer dimensions to sift through, and we simply use question text as a filter during our analysis. Notice that we also exclude demographic questions from the pivot step. In this case, ID, name, and role. This keeps those fields as separate dimensions that we can slice and dice by. Suppose that we want to exclude employees from our analysis. Now this filter applies across all of our data. If we had included this question in the pivot step, we'd have 1 less column in our data set. But now when we filter on employee, we only filter out the 1 row, so not the responses for all the questions in our survey. When you work with survey data, think about what can and can't be included in the pivot in terms of what you need to filter on later. With Prep, you'll see it's easy to go back and make changes if need be. So here is what it looks like in Tableau Desktop. We can see the demographic attributes that have been excluded from the pivot step. In our survey, that's going to be country, name, the number of conferences you guys have been to, your role, your Tableau age, so that's how long you've been using Tableau for. Now, a better version of this data set would go 1 step further and pass out the individual products into separate rows so that we can count the number of people using a particular product rather than just looking at the different combinations of products that people use. We have the options for our multiple select questions grouped together in a field called question grouping, with question text providing the row-level names of the individual products. And finally, the best version of this data set would also give the option for numerically coded responses. Here we've got 1s for yeses, 0s for no, and 1 to 5 scale for the like-it responses. This gives us an additional measure to work with so that we can compute averages, for example. Now, how do we get there? Take this piece of advice from my good friend, Ross Geller.
Yes! Oh, here we go. Pivot. 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 Shut up. Shut up. Shut up.
So pivoting is what we at Tableau call rotating or transposing columns into rows. And that's the key takeaway in this session, that survey data will almost always need to be pivoted. So to start, we need to actually go get our data. And there are 3 typical options that we can choose from. The first is to download the data as a flat file. Then we could connect via Google Sheets, or the third option is to push to a database. In some cases, though, the survey tools you're using will have a web data connector option. These are handy in the case of SurveyMonkey and Qualtrics in particular, as they allow you to pivot your data upon import, so you can actually skip those steps that we're going to see in Tableau Prep. Now, every survey tool is different, and the output your tool provides means you might need some additional tools in your kit to help reshape and clean the data. Sometimes you might only have a question number. So you don't know what question the person was responding to unless you're the person who built that survey. Here, you need to use a join with a question helper, essentially a lookup table that will translate those question IDs into text. In other cases, you may share the survey multiple times to see how responses change over time or between different groups. You can use a union step in Tableau Prep to combine all of this data before you start cleaning it. Sometimes you need to extract the answer from your question text itself. Here, for example, the question asks, what product do you use? Followed by Tableau Desktop, Tableau Prep, Online, and then Server. All we're interested in is that last word, essentially. So what I can do is use a calculated field with the split function to extract the part of the question that I actually need, so that I end up with neat and clean question labels. So Prep is the easiest place to do all of these things, and now we're going to go ahead and look and see how we can do this live on your data. So let's jump in. So I've logged into Qualtrics, and I can go ahead and pull in my survey. We're going to head to Data and Analysis, and we're going to export our data as a CSV file. It looks like we've got 68 respondents completed in the room and 10 still to go. We're just going to download the completed responses, though. So let's go ahead and export that data. We're going to first download our responses as text responses. So let me go ahead and do that. And then we're also going to download our responses as numeric values, an option given here. Once this is done, we can go ahead to our downloads folder and take a look at what that looks like. The first file we downloaded was our text responses, so I'll name it. And the second was our numeric responses. Let me go ahead and drag and drop the text responses into Tableau Prep so we can start cleaning our data up. Right now, Tableau Prep is connecting to the data and bringing in a sample of our fields and the row-level responses. That's what we're looking at here. We can already start to reduce the amount of data we're working with and make it really easy for us in the future by removing fields in this input step. For example, with the start date and the end date, I'm not interested. I just need the recorded date. So I can go ahead and uncheck those. Similarly, I'm going to do that with a couple more of the fields that I know I don't need. What I can also do in this input step is start to rename fields so that rather than using the question ID, they're using the known name variable. So here, the first question I asked you guys was, what was your name? Then I asked who you are in terms of your role, where you've come from in terms of country, how long you've been using Tableau for, which I'll call Tableau age, and finally, how many Tableau conferences you've been to, which I'll call number of TCs. Now that I'm happy with the way this looks, I can go in and add a clean step to look at what my data looks like. While this loads in, let me take a moment to explain what the Tableau Prep interface looks like for those of you who are new to the product. At the top, we've got the flow pane that tells us from input to output the different steps we're taking to clean and prepare our data. Underneath that, we've got a profile pane. The histograms show the distribution of the data so we can start to spot trends and patterns. For example, I can go in and pick on a particular respondent. I'm going to pick on Allison. Allison, are you in the room still? Don't be shy. I can't see you. Anyway, I can now read across the row and figure out what exactly your profile is. So we know that Allison is a Tableau customer. She's from the US. She's been using Tableau for about 6 to 12 months, and she's a first-timer. So welcome, Allison. What we have underneath that is the data grid. The data grid allows us to see the underlying data at a row level. And something stands out here straight away. Let's hone in on it. We've got our recorded date our header row in bold with recorded date as the first field. Underneath that, though, we've got 2 additional header rows that don't make sense. They're not actual pieces of data. Instead, they're the encoding that comes in from the Qualtrics system. So what we can do is we can go ahead and exclude those from our analysis. So now we're working with our actual respondents. The next thing I'm going to do is add in that pivot step. We hit Add Pivot, and take a look at the list of the different fields that we have. I only need to pick from question 5 through 8, since these are the actual questions of our survey, the meat of it. Everything else is demographic questions that I'm not interested in including in that pivot step. We can go ahead and rename this to question ID and to text response. Just to recap what we mean when I say pivoting the data, I'm going to jump back to this clean step. And we can see here that we started with 21 fields and 68 rows. But having completed the pivot, what I end up with is just 9 fields, but many more rows, 952. And again, just to recap, that's because now a row corresponds not to a respondent, but a respondent per question. Keep that in mind. What I'm now going to do is just repeat these steps on my numeric responses that we also downloaded. So bring that in. I'm just, again, going to drag and drop the file into Tableau Prep. Again, I only need to keep the fields that I need for my analysis. So I'll go ahead and remove the others. I can also here exclude things like your name, because there's no way to numerically code all the different names in our audience here today. So I'll go ahead and uncheck those options too. We'll add in a clean step so we can remove those header rows. That was these 2 down here. We can just right-click and hit exclude. And then the next thing we do is add in our pivot step. Here, again, we're going to pick all of our questions and exclude response ID. Note here, again, we're starting with 15 fields and 68 rows. When I complete the pivot, we end up with just 3 fields and back to the 952 rows. I'll go ahead and rename this question ID and numeric response. Now, looking at our flow pane, we can see that these 2 data sets are still separate entities. What we want to do is combine them together. And the way we do that in Tableau Prep is by using a join. I just drag and drop to perform the join. And we can see that Tableau Prep automatically spots that response ID is the common field between the 2. However, if I look at my summary of join results, we see something interesting happening here. We end up with a join result of over 13,000 rows, which is clearly incorrect. We should have just 952. So what we need to do is go back to our data and remember that we not only want to join on response ID, but also the question ID, so that we're matching every person's response to a specific question to the numeric version together. We'll marry them up. So question ID, and then question ID from the other data set as well. And now we can see we've got our correct summary of join results with just 952 rows. Let's add in a clean step and take a look at what our data looks like now. As I scroll across, the one thing some of you in the audience might notice is that there's no field here that tells me what question was actually asked. I have question ID, but no way to translate what the question that was asked was into actual readable text. So what we're going to do to generate that is we're going to go back and create the question lookup table or question helper table. Now, in some other tools, you might need to go back to Excel or something and build this out yourself manually by typing out each question. Tableau Prep, though, makes it really easy. I just add in a branch. And here, what we're going to do is instead of excluding the header rows, we're actually going to include them and only keep those. We're only interested in this first row of our data set. which translates those question numbers into text. So let's go ahead and keep only that. And I'm also going to remove the fields that we've already gone ahead and coded. So that's everything from recorded date up to number of TCs. That was the ones that I manually changed when I first imported the data in. I'll right-click and remove those fields. So now we're working with a data set that is, again, wide and short. It's 14 fields long, but only one row down. What I want to do is, again, pivot or transpose this data to create a 2-column data set. So let's add that pivot step in. This time, we're going to pivot all of our fields, so it's an easy one. And we're going to rename these fields again to question ID and question text. And now we're working with a simple lookup table. It's got a list of all of our questions and the question numbers they correspond to. So we can remove this step and join this one back in. Here, again, Tableau Prep is automatically recognizing that question ID is the matching field between the two different data sets. And our join result is correct with 952 rows. So let's add in a final clean step to review our data one last time and see if there's any changes that need to be made. Now, because we performed a join, we're going to have some duplicate fields. Here we've got question ID duplicated. I'm going to go ahead and remove those. So I'm just going to search for ID, select response ID 1, question ID 1, and question ID 2, the duplicates, and remove them. What I'm also going to do is try and group together common question types together. Let's take a closer look at what I mean by that. Here, if I zoom in, we'll see that a lot of the questions were asking the same fundamental question, but against different attributes. For example, the question about rating the quality of in-flight service, I asked you about the in-flight entertainment, I asked you about the food, the friendliness of the flight attendants. They were all essentially asking the same thing. So we want to group those together. But with Tableau Prep, I don't need to do that manually. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the field, call it question grouping. And here we're going to use a feature called group and replace to do this for us. Here, I just click on the breadcrumb trail, hit group and replace, and select pronunciation, and let Tableau Prep work its magic. What it's doing here is grouping together the question types that start the same way. For example, the what products do you use always starts with that same sentence. We can go ahead and rename that now to products. Similarly, with the in-flight services, it always starts the same way. So again, it's correctly grouped those together, and we can rename those to flights. However, the questions that we're asking you about your hotels were phrased very differently, each of the three. We've got how clean was your room upon arrival, how quick was the check-in process, and how friendly were the hotel staff. For those, I can just multiple select them and hit group values, and then rename that to hotels. And hit done. And with that, I'm happy with the way my data set looks. So the last thing I'm going to do is add an output step and review my options. With Tableau Prep, I have the option to save to file so that I can start to do my analysis in Tableau Desktop. But what I can also do is think about the rest of my team or organization who might also want to benefit from being able to use this data source, but don't want to complete all the steps that I've shown earlier. For that, we can publish as a data source to Tableau Server or Tableau Online. And now, with Prep Conductor, it becomes easy to schedule these flows so that as new data comes in, you don't need to redo this work from scratch. But for now, I'm going to keep it simple and just save to file. We'll run this flow and hit done. Now, let's take a moment to jump back to the slides and review what we've seen so far. So here's an annotated version of the flow we just built out. This, along with all of the resources from this session, will be made available to you post-conference so that you can deep dive for yourself. But let's take a moment to recap what we just covered. So I started by bringing in my text and numeric responses. I had to do some cleanup because of the extra header rows. Then I was able to pivot both those data sources and join them together so that then we could combine both our text-based responses and our numeric responses into one data source. Then, however, I realized that I only had question IDs, but no actual question text. For that, I jumped back to my text response and build in another branch. Here, I filtered down to those question IDs and question texts. I then pivot those to create a question helper or a lookup table that will translate those from IDs into text for me. Finally, I join that in, and I take 2 more clean steps just to prepare the data and group common question types together. And with that, I go ahead and output it. So now that we've prepared the data with Tableau Prep, we can go about visualizing it with Tableau Desktop. So let's jump into that now. So here is a workbook I built earlier on some dummy data. And what we're going to do is we're going to swap out the data source so that we can see the results of you guys in the room. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll jump to my sheet, connect to my other data source, and with Tableau Prep, I don't need to build all the visualizations from scratch. What I can do is I can just go in and replace the data sources, swap one out for the other. I just have to right-click, hit Replace Data Source, and tell Tableau I want to swap Output Extract 1 for Output Extract 2, and hit OK. And straight away, we see the first visualization change. Now, it makes sense that most of you guys in the room are going to be customers, but it looks like we also have a couple of partners here as well. If I jump to the dashboard, it's going to take a second to load up our visualizations again, but now we can see the distribution of how people are how people responded to our survey. So let's take a closer look. We've mostly got Tableau customers in the room, a lot of first-timers like myself, so welcome everyone. We've got mostly people from the US. Again, makes sense. We are in the US after all. It looks like most of you guys use desktop and server. So if you guys are new to Prep, make sure you head to a lot of the other sessions that are at conference teaching you how to use Prep for more broad use cases. But what I want to do now is to show you how to build these visualizations from scratch. So for that, I'm going to jump into my starter workbook and connect to the data again. So the first visualization I want to build out is looking at the roles of the different people in this room. So let's start by bringing out number of records, just so I can get an understanding of my data. Now, if I bring out number of records, we've got that 952 number that we've been seeing throughout this session. But remember, this isn't the number of respondents. This is the number of respondents per question. Instead, we should always be looking at a count distinct of our response IDs. So I'm going to drag and drop that into my visualization, and we can compare the two. Now we're getting the right numbers, the 68 people instead. So let's get rid of this. What we're then going to do is break it down by role. So I just drag and drop that in onto columns. And again, we've got our breakdown of the 2 different roles within the room. I'm going to use Show Me to switch this from a bar chart instead to a tree map, since that shows me the part-to-whole relationship of the 2 different types of people in the room. And there we have it, our first visualization. Next, we're going to take a look at the Tableau usage in the room. For that, again, we're going to be using a count distinct of our response ID. Now, because I know I'm always going to be looking at my response IDs as counts and not using them as a dimension, I can go ahead and easily convert that into a permanent state within my data model. I just have to drag and drop dimensions from drag and drop. Let me get the right way around. I just want to drag and drop response ID from dimensions into measures. So now we can see it's always going to be used as a count distinct. So let's bring that into my view onto color. And then break this down by number of TCs along my rows. I'll set this to entire view so everyone can see. And then the Tableau age along the top. We'll go ahead and reorder these so that it makes sense. So less than 6 months comes first, and 6 to 12 months second. And I'm also going to go ahead and exclude some of the null respondents that we've got. So it looks like that. Last but not least is building out the visualization that shows us where you guys have traveled from. For that, I'm going to go ahead and double-click on country. Tableau automatically recognizes geographic fields, so I don't need to do any geocoding to my underlying data. Again, I'm going to bring the count distinct of my response ID onto color. And what stands out straight away here is, of course, the majority of this audience is from the US. But suppose I had more data and I wanted to look at patterns across the world, then it's hard to see those patterns because the darkest blue is concentrated within the US, and the other two countries, Norway and, let me get this right, my geography is not very good, Ecuador, look pretty much the same. What I can do is I can switch this from the absolute values of a count instead to using a rank. I'll go ahead and use a quick table calculation to rank these. Once I rank them, I of course need to reverse the color scheme so that it makes sense. And hit apply. Now that I've created the 3 visualizations that focus on the demographic attributes, let's get into the meat of our survey so we can start to build out the visualizations to represent those survey responses. Let's take a look at the single select question. What are you most excited to do here at conference? I'm going to go ahead and bring out my question grouping, set this to entire view again, and we're only interested in this first question for our visualization, so we'll keep only that. Next, we're going to go ahead and bring out the text response, the different options you could choose from. So now we've got our different options listed out. And again, all we have to do to build out the simple bar chart is bring out a count distinct of our response IDs. I'll turn on labels so we can see how many people we've got and sort this view. I'll go ahead and hide the header just to keep it kind of clean and simple. Now suppose also that I want to switch this from looking at it as absolute values to a % of total. Again, with Tableau Desktop, this is built in as a calculation. I don't need to write it. I right-click on the pill, head over to Quick Table Calculation, and switch it to a % of total. And we'll watch the values change on screen as I do that. So now we can see that roughly 70% of the people in the room today are here and are most excited to train and learn. So hopefully you leave today's session having learned something new. Next, we come on to our multiple select questions. For this, again, I'm going to start the same way I did my last visualization. I'll bring out question grouping. And this time, we're only interested in the products question, so we'll keep only that. And then I'll bring out my question text. And this is the example that we saw in our PowerPoint slides, where it asks you which products do you use, -Tableau Desktop, -Tableau Online, and so on. We only need that last word. So what we can do is, again, use a split to just extract that from the question text so that we end up with clean and simple labels. So I'll go ahead and right-click on question text, hit transform, and select custom split. We want to use the separator of a space. And since we only want the last word, we just need to split off the last column. I can hit OK. And what that does is it generates a new field within my dimensions. Let me drag and drop this into the visualization. And now we can see our clean labels for desktop, online, prep, and server. Let's get rid of our original question text and bring out our count distinct of response ID. Now, this doesn't look right. I'm sure the 68 of you that responded don't use all 4 products, especially between prep and especially between online and server. You usually use one or the other. So there's clearly something going on here. And the thing to remember here is that we have our numeric response field. Remember that we count ones as yeses and nos as zeros. So here, if I bring this out now, when we add these up, because it's just counting up all the yeses, we're going to end up with the right numbers. So that's the version of the data, or the version of the field we should use in particular. So I'm going to switch this from a horizontal bar chart instead to a vertical one. And again, just hide the header. Now, last thing to do is to analyze our like-at-scale responses. For this one, I'm going to show you two different ways of visualizing the data. So for the first, let's take a look at our flights. Again, I'll bring out question grouping, keep only the flights-related questions, and bring in my question text. We run into the same problem that we did earlier, but we already know how to solve it. I just right-click on question text, transform using a custom split. However, if we take a closer look here at our data, using a space as the separator doesn't quite work, because then I would only get the last word. Instead, the common delimiter to split on this time round is going to be a colon dash. And again, we want to split off the last column. I'll hit OK and bring that into my visualization. Then we need to bring out the text responses for the different options you guys could have chosen from. Let's add that in. Here we've got everything from excellent, good, average, poor, and terrible. So I'm going to go ahead and exclude the nulls that we're not interested in, and then reorder my fields. So we want excellent first, followed by good, average, poor, and then terrible. Then all we need to do, again, as per usual, is bring out a count distinct of our response IDs. Now, throughout this session, I've always been using bar charts. So I want a little bit more variety. So for this visualization, instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take text response and bring it over to color to create stacked bars. Here now the bars are different lengths because not everyone responded to every single question. So it makes sense to again switch this to a % of total and compute this across the table so that every row adds up to 100%. The final thing to do is, of course, use colors that make sense. For that, we double-click on the legend. And I'm going to go in and use dark greens for my positive comments, and orange for my middle one, and then reds for my negative comments. And we can start to see a distribution of those responses. So that's just one way to visualize like-at-scale responses. Let's take a look at one other alternative. For that, we're going to look at your hotel experience. Let's bring out question grouping. And for the last time, we'll filter on just our hotels to keep only. We'll bring in our question text. But this time, we can't use the trick of using a split, since every question is written differently. There's nothing common in there to extract the useful information from. So here, we're just going to have to edit the alias. We'll call this one cleanliness. We'll rename this one how quick the check-in process was to speediness. And finally, how friendly were the staff members? We'll rename that to friendliness. And hit OK. Now, the way we're going to visualize this instead is by using our numeric responses. Remember, we rated our questions. We turned those text responses into ratings. We converted those from 1 for a negative response all the way through to 5 for a positive response. So if I bring those out now, Tableau defaults to a sum. Now, obviously, that doesn't make sense since it's just going to add up all those different scores together. Instead, what we want to do is right-click and change the aggregation from a sum to an average. Now we can see our axis at the bottom changed to go from 0 to 4. Now, because the maximum possible value is 5, I want to reflect that with my axis. So I just right-click to edit the axis, set this to fixed from 0 through to 5. The last thing I'm going to do is switch this from a bar chart to a circle mark type. So it looks more like ratings on a scale. I'll make these bigger and turn on my labels. Finally, I need to bring my visualizations together in a dashboard. That's really where the value is at. I'm going to bring in each visualization into these containers. Just drag and drop them all in. And if I just scroll up, we can just resize the different elements so we're making the most of the space we have. Next, I'm going to bring in my single select and multi-select options. And again, just remove my little placeholder. And finally, bring out the Likert scale responses. And we can remove all of our legends since we've been using consistent and clear color schemes. Now, at the moment, this dashboard is pretty static. If I tried to click on anything, nothing would happen because I haven't set any filter actions just yet. To do that, I can click on any one of the visualizations and hit this Use as Filter icon. If you're new to Tableau, that's the magic button that does all the filtering that happens behind the scenes. So I just click on that on these 3 visualizations. The reason why I only used it on these 3 visualizations is because they're the demographic attributes that at the beginning I said we wanted to slice and dice our data by. So now I can go in and see we had a few partners in the room. Let's go ahead and see where they were from. So all from the US. A lot of them are fairly new partners, been using Tableau for about 6 to 12 months, and it's their first conference. They use a mixture of desktop, server, online, and prep, and they're mostly here to train, inspire, but also to party. So hopefully you guys enjoy Wednesday. In the same way, I can go and look for my fellow EMEA representative from Norway and see what products they use. They're still new to Tableau, so they're using Tableau Desktop. Hopefully, after having been to this session, our Norwegian in the room is going to start using Tableau Prep too. Now, with a little bit of time spent formatting, we end up with a visualization that looks like this. Now, formatting is key because it's not just about the analytical value. It's also about the people who engage with the dashboards. And if something looks good, then it's more likely to increase adoption and engagement going forward. Think also if you're presenting your survey results instead of internally, also to your customers. They want to use their corporate branding so that they can see it represented in their own context and become more familiar with it. So with that, let's jump back into the slides to review what we've learned. So when working with survey data, it can be tempting to simply cut the number of columns you're working with just because it makes it easier.
You want to return this couch? It's cut in half.
That's what I'm telling you.
Did you cut this couch in half?
This couch is cut in half. I would like to exchange it for one that is not cut in half.
You're telling me this couch was delivered to you like this?
Look, I'm a reasonable man. I will accept store credit.
I'll give you store credit in the amount of $4.
I will take it.
So instead of trying to cut the data down in terms of the number of columns, you should take Ross's advice. and pivot the data so that you're working with tall and thin data rather than short and wide data. Now, I started off by telling you all how I shared resources with that potential date, and I'm going to leave you all with the same as well. I've got links to my blog posts at tinyurl.com/archblogs. I also want to thank Steve Wexler and Emma White, Tableau Zen Masters, as their resources have been really helpful to me in the past and have also helped shape this session. And I also want you to check out the on-demand training video, specifically the one for pivoting in prep, which you can find at tinyurl.com/prep-pivot. I mentioned Steve a second ago, and he's actually here at conference presenting the follow-on to this session, which deep dives into the trickier challenges posed by survey data. So you can find him at conference on Thursday, same time slot as now. If you're more interested in hearing about use cases, then we have our customer speaker, VMware, as well as our very own HR team talking about how they use Tableau with survey data. If you enjoyed this session and found it useful, please complete the session survey in our app. Hopefully, I'm going to be getting better ratings from you guys over my Uber drivers. I'm going to be analyzing the results of this survey using Tableau Prep and Desktop, and the feedback really does go a long way in helping us improve the session for future conferences, as well as giving me more chances to come over to America for this conference. So with that, I want to thank you guys for joining me and wish you a very good conference. Thank you.